Good morning, folks, and some good news to start off this week's episode. I'm on my way home. This week's episode was released just as I'm boarding my flight back to East Tennessee from the oil patch. Just one layover in Dallas before I land in Knoxville. I'm praying there will not be any delays or problems with the airlines like the ones that happened in December when I was traveling home on my anniversary. Let me tell you, I am so looking forward to being home again. Even if it is just for a short time, I really miss my bride. These 5 weeks dragged by at a glacial pace. For this quick turnaround trip home, I do not have many campaign events scheduled. In fact, only one public event, and it really isn't a campaign specific. I will be at the Music in the Mountains Spring Parade in Pigeon Forge, and it takes place on Saturday the 13th. The parade route begins by entering the Pigeon Forge Parkway near traffic light number 6 and heads north towards Sevierville to traffic light number 3. My lovely bride and I will be out there amongst our fellow Sevier Countyans. My daughter may be tagging along as well. Come up and say hello if you see us out and about in the crowd. Free parking for the parade is available at the LeConte Center Municipal Lot or at Patriot Park in the Old Mill area. Later that evening, a fellow veteran and friend from my church will be getting baptized. So Denise and I will be headed there to watch this wonderful occasion. Not much else is going on during this week except catching up on the missed time with my bride and catching up on all the chores around the house Denise has been handling while I've been gone. It has almost been like being back in the Navy. Well, that's it for the personal update. In next week's opening, I'll let the audience know where my next set of training and coaching engagements will take me. For a clue, I once spent 7 weeks in this part of the country early in my Navy career, back in 1988. When Ronaldus Maximus was still our president and commander-in-chief. In this week's episode, on the topic of lies, we're going to revisit some of Tennessee Governor Bill Lee's lies, along with exposing the lies concerning his and the establishment Republicans around their so-called Education Reform Initiative or Education Freedom Initiative, and just how much it will cost, not just in terms of freedom, but in other metrics as well. We'll also talk about State Representative Gloria Johnson. If you do not know or remember who she is, that's a good thing. But she was part of the Tennessee Three that caused an uproar in the General Assembly last year. She, like many other Caucasian liberal women always do, she took advantage of the situation where 2 young black men in the General Assembly were ousted from their positions, only to be put back in by their local commie communities. Anyway, this typical liberal or communist woman has decided to take on Senator Marsha Blackburn in this year's election to represent Tennessee in the United States Senate. Mind you, this woman's major claim to fame is being part of the Tennessee Three, but she is also one of the biggest spreaders of the liberal lie that is euphemistically called reproductive rights or reproductive freedom. I regularly comment on her insane posts that are on Twitter or X all the time. If you're on that social media platform, you should check out her wackadoodle posts. She is definitely cut from the communist cloth, if you know what I mean. She supports disarming American citizens, killing babies in the womb, and sexualizing children in the classrooms of government indoctrination centers, which isn't really surprising that she was a government school teacher at one point in her life. And there's this. If there is time at the end of the show, I also want to touch on a lie that is used to promote immorality. It might not be what you're thinking about. That was a lot of information for this week's introduction, but I ask that you all stay tuned throughout the whole show. And before we move on with the show, here comes my standard campaign disclaimer. The following content is approved by Larry Linton for TN12, candidate for the GOP nomination for Tennessee House of Representatives, District 12, Larry Linton, Treasurer. Now, with the disclaimer out of the way, please stick with me as I provide some examples of the lies that Bill Lee, Gloria Johnson, establishment Republicans, and people in general tell every day. Now, let's get on with this week's episode of the Liberty, Leadership, and Lies podcast. Welcome to the Liberty, Leadership, and Lies podcast. On this show, we will discuss the assaults on our liberty by the very institution we the people created to secure our liberty. We will also compare and contrast the actions of people in leadership positions to the servant leadership that is needed to protect our God-given, constitutionally protected rights. Additionally, We will break down the many lies that elected and unelected officials in government and media spin every day in order to secure for themselves positions of power and influence that are antithetical to the system of government our founding fathers created and passed down to us. Your host on this program is Larry Linton, a 30-year veteran of the United States Navy who also runs his own leadership consulting company. He is also a candidate for the Republican Party's nomination to represent Tennessee's House District 12, which includes Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge, Pittman Center, Weirs Valley, Seymour, and parts of Sevierville, and most of Sevier County. So here is your host, Larry Linton. Okay, folks, we're going to kick off this segment by pointing out trans-Republican Governor Bill Lee's lies that he initially campaigned on. He called them the 10 for 10. I'm discussing these lies once again because they represent what many establishment or uniparty Republicans often do. They lie to get votes. How do we know they lie? Well, has the governor followed through on his promises now that he is halfway through his second term? Let's see. During Governor Lee's initial gubernatorial campaign, he unveiled his, what many people called ambitious 10 for 10 plan, which outlined promises, lies, aimed at what the establishment politicians said would be addressing various issues affecting the volunteer state. And as I mentioned, halfway through his second, yes, second, because he fooled everybody again during his re-election campaign in 22, which was bolstered by the establishment Republicans that run the Tennessee State Republican Party, he has failed to fulfill these pledges, which is, of course, why they can be seen for what they truly are, lies. Now let's break them down individually. Lie number 1 of 10, education reform. Bill Lee vowed to implement significant reforms in Tennessee's education system, focusing on improving student outcomes and teacher support. However, his tenure over 6 years now has been marred by controversy surrounding funding cuts to public education and lackluster efforts in addressing systemic challenges within the schools. Those challenges are in place because of two things, folks: government intervention, along with public sector union control of education institutions. The failure to enact substantial reforms has hindered progress in tackling educational disparities and enhancing the overall quality of education in the state. And now, which we're going to cover in a later segment, he and the rest of the establishment Republicans are selling the idea that the government can bribe us Tennesseans with our own tax dollars so we can purchase freedom from the failure that is government-run education. Don't fall for the promises, the lies of this new entitlement program. It will only lead to more tyranny. Now, lie number 2 was this: economic development. The governor, as a candidate, pledged to foster economic growth and job creation through targeted initiatives and incentives for businesses. Despite his promises, the volunteer state has pockets of communities that continue to grapple with economic inequality, and with many communities experiencing stagnation and limited opportunities, which again can be traced back to the root cause of government intervention and the unconstitutional role of picking winners and losers in a free market economy. The lack of effective strategies to stimulate economic development has left numerous Tennesseans struggling to make ends meet, undermining the prosperity of the state as a whole. One of the ways in which he sought to do this was the old government tyranny, and as I just mentioned, the government trick of picking winners and losers in the marketplace. He called for the convening of a special session of the General Assembly so that the Uniparty could hand over to Ford Motor Company nearly $1 billion of taxpayer money on their plan to build a blue oval city out near Memphis. I hope you've all seen the headlines recently about the auto industries, all of them shifting away from electric vehicles and are now focusing on hybrids. Well, the Blue Oval City was to be the electric vehicle production mecca of the United States. That's how Ford Motor Company and the establishment politicians sold it to us Tennesseans. Now, well, not so much. Remember, almost everything government touches when it interferes in the free market turns to poop, ladies and gentlemen. Now it is evident that the Bill Lee and most of the Republicans in the General Assembly just poop our tax dollars down the drain. Why? Of course, it was to help their reelection chances. That is always the reason for what these politicians do, folks. Well, almost always. There are a few that are different, those that seek elected office to serve their constituents and follow their oaths. Now let's get on to the next lie. Number 3 on this list was affordable healthcare access. It was a cornerstone of Governor Lee's campaign platform, yet his administration's actions have fallen short of addressing the healthcare needs of vulnerable populations. The biggest impediment to access to affordable healthcare of Tennesseans is what's called the Tennessee's Certificate of Need, or CON laws. For those listeners unfamiliar with CON laws, they require hospitals and other medical providers to obtain special government permission, which is often costly and difficult, and it's a lengthy bureaucratic approval process, by demonstrating a need for their services in geographic areas where they propose to build new facilities or offer new care. It's just another example of the government picking winners and losers in the free market and in the healthcare market as well. If Bill Lee and the establishment worked on repealing Tennessee's remaining Certificate of Need laws, those CON laws, it would prevent unelected bureaucrats from further constricting healthcare access and distorting the free market. Of course, the commies will say that the refusal to expand Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, that has deprived thousands of low-income residents of essential medical coverage. Now, right here, I must admit that when the General Assembly refuses to expand that program, it's a good thing. And at the base of that program is more central government control, and in an area not covered by its enumerated powers. But again, folks, we must look at the root cause of higher costs and of rationing care. It is always government interventions. We're going to skip over promises number 4 and 5 because those are the promises he made to appeal to the liberals and the commies. The central government is doing their part for criminal justice reform all over the country, which has resulted in a dramatic increase of uncharged crime. And as it relates to infrastructure, well, we all know about Biden's, along with the uniparty's infrastructure legislation, which was just the Green New Deal repackaged and relabeled with the same result: higher prices, higher inflation, government intervention in the free market, and the loss of liberty. His promise, or lie number 6, discussed rural development. For the residents of Sevier County, how are you liking all of that rural development? Well, we can't blame that entirely on the governor. Most of the blame for the problems here in Sevier County rests squarely on the shoulders of the county commission. Speaking of which, did you know that a member of the county commission, a 23-year member of the county commission, is also running to represent House District 12 in the August 1st Republican primary? For the voters here in Sevier County, and most specifically the voters that live in House District 12, please keep that in mind when you hear about water shortages, being stuck in traffic just trying to get to work or church, or watching as these housing subdivisions pop up faster than Dollar Generals do all over the place. Yep, that is what the establishment wants for its residents. Just new taxpayers crammed into subdivisions with tiny lots being stuck in traffic all day, and maybe without any drinking water. Now, that's all the time I have in this segment, folks. Stick around through this upcoming break as we continue the breakdown of Bill Lee's 10 for 10 lies. Okay, folks, continuing on with the lies that make up Governor Bill Lee's 10 for 10. Number 7 was fiscal responsibility. While campaigning for office, he vowed to exercise fiscal responsibility and prudent budget management to ensure the efficient use of taxpayer dollars. However, his administration has faced scrutiny over questionable spending decisions and a lack of transparency in budgetary allocations. The failure to uphold principles of fiscal accountability has eroded public trust and raised concerns about the stewardship of state resources under Governor Lee's leadership. Look at the Ford Motor Company deal I previously mentioned, as well as something we'll discuss in a bit. Governor Lee's and the establishment Republicans' education freedom initiatives. Now on to number 8. That one was titled Government Accountability. Transparency and accountability in government were central themes of Governor Lee's campaign rhetoric. Yet his administration has been criticized for his lack of transparency and accountability in decision-making processes. From closed-door negotiations to conflicts of interest, Governor Lee's failure to uphold principles of good governance has undermined public confidence in the integrity of state institutions. He has even used employees of his administration, members of the executive branch that are paid with the tax dollars of Tennesseans, to lobby the General Assembly. Imagine that. We are being forced to pay for lobbyists of the executive branch that often advocate for liberty eroding policies and bills that Governor Lee has pushed and proposed. How does that grab you, folks? Well, it probably grabs you by the wallet. What did you think I was going to say? Also, just look at the bill that was recently introduced in the General Assembly. Senate Bill 2093 and House Bill 1692 seeks to obscure deals made through the Department of Tourist Development, which is part of the executive branch. This bill was sought by Governor Lee and pushed through their respective chambers by the usual suspects, Senator Jack Johnson and Representative William Lambert, who we talked about last week. Now, just why would this department of the executive branch want to hide information? Well, it is because it has something to hide. An Occam's razor situation there. That bill has passed in both chambers of the General Assembly, and it is expected that Governor Lee will sign it because he asked for it. Now on to promise number 9. Governor and then candidate Bill Lee pledged to address the opioid crisis plaguing Tennessee through comprehensive prevention, treatment, and enforcement measures. However, efforts to combat the epidemic have been largely ineffective, with opioid-related deaths continuing to rise and access to an addiction treatment remaining limited. The failure to implement evidence-based strategies has perpetuated the devastating impact of the opioid crisis on individuals, families, and communities across the state. One of the many ways to combat this problem is by attacking the problem of illegal immigration head on. The General Assembly, most likely encouraged by Lee, has killed many pieces of legislation aimed at reducing the flow of illegal immigrants into the volunteer state. Finally, we get to promise number 10. Support for veterans and military families was a key promise of Governor Lee's campaign, yet many veterans continue to face challenges in accessing healthcare, employment, and other essential services. Despite rhetoric emphasizing the importance of honoring veterans' sacrifices, substantive action to address their needs has been lacking and leaving many of them feeling neglected and underserved by their state government. Additionally, he took no action to prevent the members of the Tennessee National Guard from the ridiculous and unconstitutional jab mandates, with the individual members subsequent being removed from service to the state and to the nation for rightfully failing to comply with the unconstitutional order. So let's wrap this up. We can conclude that Governor Billy, completely failed to fulfill his 10 for 10 campaign promises. Whether willfully or negligently remains to be seen. It does, however, reflect a broader pattern of ineffective leadership and misplaced priorities. Or should I say ineffective servant leadership and prioritizing establishment and communist priorities vice those from the constituency that elected him, that of the conservative Republicans in the state. From education and healthcare to economic development and criminal justice reform, Governor Lee's administration has fallen far short of addressing the pressing issues facing Tennessee. As we, the citizens here in Tennessee, grapple with ongoing challenges, it is imperative for elected officials to uphold their commitments and prioritize the well-being of all Tennesseans. Failure to do so not only erodes public trust, but also undermines the collective prosperity of the state. It has got to the point where we need to modify the old joke that states, how can you tell a lawyer is lying? Well, his lips are moving. Well, the better version of this joke, and it really isn't a joke because it's a fact. How can you tell a communist, a liberal, a Democrat, and an establishment Republican are lying? Well, their lips are moving. Here's the biggest difference, though. When a lawyer lies, it may cost you time and money. However, when one of the people in the four groups of politicians lie to you, it will cost you time, money, and freedom. Moving on now, let's get into the mislabeled education freedom bit of legislation that is being pushed here in Tennessee right now. We spoke about it a couple of weeks ago, but let's get into some of the costs associated with it. And since this garbage piece of legislation is coming from the establishment Republicans, if passed, we will know it will cost us what? Yeah, I just said it. It will cost us all time, money, and freedom. The proponents argue that school choice measures offer families greater educational options and foster competition, leading to improved outcomes. That in itself is a lie. Many of these pieces of legislation only serve to turn the private education institutions that accept government money into a newer version of the government education centers parents are pulling their children out of just to get a chance at the facade of education freedom. A closer examination of the proposed legislation reveals significant financial implications that extend beyond the surface. One of the primary components of school choice legislation is the implementation of voucher programs, which allow parents to use public funds to enroll their children in private or charter schools. While the proponents tout the benefits of expanded educational opportunities, the reality is that voucher programs divert taxpayer dollars away from other sectors of actual constitutionally authorized spending. Moreover, the cost of administering voucher programs, including oversight and accountability measures, adds an additional financial burden to the state and local governments. Perhaps the most significant financial implication of school choice legislation is its impact on government school funding. As tax dollars are diverted to voucher programs and charter schools, the commies and establishment Republicans will start crying that traditional public schools are left with fewer resources to meet the needs of their students. We all know where that will lead, don't we? More cries from politicians for the government to quote unquote invest more and more tax dollars into their broken beyond repair government education system. Because this will initially result in staff layoffs, program cuts, and deteriorating infrastructure, it will end up costing the taxpayers more than it already does to make up for the sudden competition that will be injected into the education landscape. It too, though, is a facade of competition, though, because with government money comes government strings. Always. Well, I'm up against a time break again here, folks. So we're going to pick this up in the next segment. So please don't go away. I'll be right back after this break. Okay, folks, we're back for the final full segment this week. Back to the cost of the lie that is education freedom legislation before we talk about State Representative Gloria Johnson. Like many of the true conservatives that have come out against this bill, I agree that it will end up just making private schools and charter schools that accept these vouchers. It will ultimately end up just turning them into another set of government schools. It is sad, though, that it is only conservatives and the commies that are against this bill. Please understand that it is for two very different reasons. The conservatives are against it because it will be just another government takeover of a sector of the private economy and that it erodes liberty. The commies are against it because of a couple of reasons as well. The first, most likely reason, and it is because they are incapable of critical thinking, these pieces of legislation often have the word freedom tied to it. The commies are always instinctively against anything that promotes liberty and freedom for the people. If they had really dug deep into this bill, and many others like it around the country, they would be able to see the second and third order effects of these education freedom or education voucher bills. They erode the people's liberty and rob them of their sweat equity. That is something the commies absolutely love. The commies are against these types of bills for another reason as well, is because there might be the off chance that one or two of these private sector education institutions that end up escaping the watchful eye of Big Brother and his 50 little nephews do not follow the guidelines and practices of these public sector teachers unions. The elected commies cannot have that, not one bit. Why? Well, we've discussed this before. You cannot have communism unless you have the kids. These teacher unions have been pushing the anti-family, anti-religion curriculum for years, and they do not want to see anything that could impede that progress. As I've mentioned in the past, the schools that accept these vouchers will just have to submit to the same rules and standards established for government schools. Just look at what those rules and standards have done to that institution that is public education or government education. Along with the interference of the central government in Washington, D.C., and their public sector teacher union useful idiots. Mark my words, folks, that will be the end result of this illusion of education freedom. The end result will be the continued undermining in the quality of education for the majority of students in our state. The only ones safe will be those that attend private schools that do not accept vouchers, or what I consider to be the best option today, homeschooling. Beyond the immediate financial cost, school choice legislation can have long-term fiscal consequences for states like Tennessee. Studies have shown that voucher programs and charter school expansions often fail to deliver the promised academic outcomes, leading to wasted resources and missed opportunities for meaningful education reform. Again, why would that happen? Because those institutions that were once firmly ensconced in the private sector just became another extension of the government sector institution that is going to intrude in the lives of every Tennessean. While school choice legislation may promise greater educational opportunities for Tennessee students, the actual costs behind these proposals reveal a complex and multifaceted issue. And those costs are freedom and money. From the diversion of public funds to the erosion of public school funding, the financial implications of school choice extend far beyond the surface. As the members of the Tennessee General Assembly debate the merit of school choice measures, it is essential to consider the long-term fiscal consequences, as well as that erosion of liberty that will always happen under the guise of government bribing the citizens to purchase their children's freedom from the institution that government fully controls. I would like to encourage you to contact your state representative and state senator here in Tennessee and urge them to not pass this legislation that will end up robbing us and our children of our liberty, but will ultimately end up robbing our children of a proper education. Now that we've covered Bill Lee's campaign lies and the lies about education, quote unquote, freedom, let's step gently around the mind of one of the biggest liars in the General Assembly. Yes, that would be one state representative, Gloria Johnson. Sadly, she represents a district in East Tennessee, an area of the state that I thought to be the last bastion of freedom here in the volunteer state. But her district includes Knoxville, a city not well known for its conservative values. You guys ever notice that? Some consider it a weird phenomenon, but I don't. Most major cities and states all over the country tend to have either some communist leanings or have gone full-blown commie. The reason should be obvious. Most of the residents of these larger cities have succumbed to the addiction to the government largesse, or the public largesse that the government controls. That means programs and policies that the city governing institutions use to, quote unquote, purchase their loyalty. It is only in rural America and rural Tennessee that freedom and liberty truly have a home. And each day, it is the establishment Republicans working hand in hand with the commies that are causing the city-born communism to spread. I encourage you to test my theory. Here's a way to do it. Go up to any stranger on the street in any medium to large city in the state or around the country and ask them what the role of government is. You will get any variety of answers that all have at their base that the government is supposed to take care of the citizens. As if any freedom loving American adult, after reaching the age of majority, which is typically 18 years of age, wants to trade in their natural born parents to get a new parent that comes in the form of government. But that is what is happening. You see it on college campuses as well. These college students traded in their natural born parents that are paying for their education for a new set of parents. The institution that is filled with communists that have accepted the kids' natural born parents' money that now use it to indoctrinate those same kids into a new way of thinking and behaving. Thinking and behavior that is rooted in government becoming Big Daddy. On the other hand, go out and visit the people living in small towns or out in the country. Ask them what is the role of government. And their varied answers will all boil down to them just wanting the government to leave them the heck alone. Now, Tennessee State Representative Gloria Johnson's district is filled with the former people, the ones that see government as Big Daddy, the ones that have become addicted to Big Daddy government taking care of them. And she's fully bought into that. Go ahead and take a look at her Twitter feed. It is full of lies about reproductive health, as if killing babies in the womb is related in any way, shape, or form to reproduction. She also routinely decries the practice referred to as gerrymandering when talking about the GOP and the majority they hold in the state legislature. Never mind that both political parties engage in that practice when they hold the majority. No, it's only bad if the GOP does it. Well, I'm up on another hard break here, folks. Don't go away because we'll be back for more on this lunatic communist, as well as the closing of this week's show with some wisdom from God's word on the other side of this break. And we're back. I actually wish that I had more time to expose just how deranged Gloria Johnson is, folks. But I want to get to the final topic before we close. If you're really interested in just how unhinged this elected official is, just check out her Twitter feed. It's full of lies and insane posts. Be careful, though. Don't let her drag you into it. Now, though, I want to discuss the many lies that are being used to cover up the rampant immorality that is happening in our state and our nation. While I was researching material for this week's episode, I keep seeing these news stories pop up in my feed. Remember, I look at just about every news site there is. You have to know what your adversary is thinking and saying so that you can counter their lunacy in the arena of facts and logic. Well, I kept seeing these many different articles that come up with as many different variations of sexual orientation as there are genders in the minds of the mentally ill. I'll list just a couple of them that are new to me that I read about. Keep this in mind when you hear these terms, folks. The lunatics just want to apply some veneer of legitimacy to the immoral behavior by using scientific terms to describe their debauchery. Again, it's all just lies. So here are some of the new terms I learned that comes from the minds of the many lost souls out there. Gynosexual, polysexual, abrosexual, omnisexual, solo polyamory. Well, that's just a small sampling of what fills the news feeds of everybody on the internet right now. Just imagine what that is doing to the sexually confused children exposed to it. And because it is on the internet and often from well-known websites and scholars, the teachers' unions in our country have been successful in their two-pronged attack on children's minds, on the internet and in the classroom. Well, ladies and gentlemen, our time together this week is drawn to a close, and I am so looking forward to holding my bride in my arms here in a few hours. As always, I am humbly asking that you remember to subscribe to the show on Rumble and YouTube. Also, please share it with your family, friends, neighbors, and everyone that's in your circle of influence. Also, I want to thank each and every one of you again today for joining me this week and every week. Today's wisdom from God's Word comes to us from the book of Proverbs, chapter 19, verse 5. A false witness will not go unpunished, and he who breathes out lies will not escape. There is a way to punish the false witnesses in our government, from the Communist Party as well as the establishment Republicans. How so, you may ask? Well, you vote them out of office or you don't put them in office. Do not let them escape your wrath on election day. Send them packing. As I continuously say, we must elect people that will put government back into its constitutionally limited role in the lives of the citizens. Do not live out the definition of insanity by doing the same thing that has always been done. For the residents of Tennessee House District 12, I'm humbly asking you for your support and your vote in the upcoming primary. Sevier County, as I've said before, and will say until the election, we can fire the shot that will be heard around the state. The residents of Seymour, Pittman Center, Weirs Valley, Pigeon Forge, Gatlinburg, parts of Sevierville, and the other parts of the district here in Sevier County can stand up to Nashville and say, we're mad as heck and we're not going to take it anymore. We are no longer going to put up with the political class's usurpations of our liberty. House District 12 can do that by choosing somebody that understands how to follow an oath to the Constitution. If you would like to know more about me and what I stand for, please visit my website. It is libertyleadershipandlies.com. That's all one word, no spaces, libertyleadershipandlies.com. And that's it for this week, folks. As I mentioned in the opening, I hope to see many of the residents of Sevier County at the parade in Pigeon Forge this weekend. Until next week, I humbly pray and ask that you stand in the arena with me. Reveille, it's time to wake up.